Joining me today for the interview is Lavonna Roth. She is the founder and lead speaker at Ignite Your Shine. She's an author. She's a speaker who provides professional development and services for educators literally around the world. Internationally renowned speaker. Lavonna describes her passion as being to empower educators to find the greatness within their students and also the greatness within ourselves as educators so that we can radically change the traditional approach to education in order to best serve our students through the lens of brain research, through the lens of social emotional needs, and through the idea of the lens of the whole child. So I'm really excited to have Lavonna joining me today. So Lavonna, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, anytime, Tom. Great to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to reconnect. I remember our connection at a conference a number of years ago and just remember being very impressed by your keynote presentation. And just, when I started the podcast, I knew you were someone I wanted to have on. So as I said to you, you've been on the list for a long time. So I'm glad we were able to find time to make this happen. So it's great to have you. So let's begin with, but before we dig into how we can ignite everyone's shine, let's begin with the Lavonna Roth story. Let's talk about the highlights of your career as an educator. You began teaching in 1996 at the Hilliard City School District in Columbus, Ohio. So take us through the evolution of your career. Let's talk about, how do you go from starting teaching in 1996 to ending up here as a internationally recognized expert and speaker and leader in the area of social emotional learning and the whole child.
Yes. So, wow, you're taking me back. I'm feeling old with the 1996, Tom. Do you have to really say that? No.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Age is just the thing. So
there you go.
Yeah, I started out in 1996 in Hilliard City Schools, and I was teaching 7th and 8th grade, and it was a crazy moment of being a brand new teacher. And I have a degree in deaf education, but I also am certified for elementary, and that went up through 8th grade. And so a first year of teaching, and I'm at a school that I ended up teaching 5 preps. So anyone who does dairy knows that's typically not. But not only was I teaching 5 different preps, but I was also on a cart. I didn't have my own room, and we were in a 2-story building. So between classes that were only 3 minutes apart, I would have to get my cart down the crowded hallway, up the elevator, all the good stuff, including setting up science labs. So, years later, I went to my principal, who I truly admire. But I went to him and I said, what were you thinking doing that to a first year teacher? And so I made it. I totally made it, kept going and loved it. And I taught 5 years in Ohio, and then the beautiful weather of Florida drew me down. So I came down here, and a crazy part of this was I only had 1 day to get a job when I flew down. And so I ended up getting a 2nd grade position. And when I talk about going through culture shock,
I would imagine.
8th grade, yes, to 2nd grade, I was like, what do you mean you don't know how to tie your shoes? Mm-hmm. Sweetheart, you have snot running down your face and the tissues are right there. So all of those moments that I ended up falling in love with them, but I knew in that moment that I was meant for older. So I ended up teaching 5th grade for a few years. After that, went back to middle school. And then I had the opportunity to step out, and I was actually getting ready to interview as an assistant principal. My 2nd master's is in educational leadership. Mm-hmm. And I had a moment of someone saying, hey, why don't you try this? And I thought, well, you know what, before I commit to be going into administration, maybe I should step out and just try some other things. So that's led to a totally different path for me, anywhere from working for a university and doing sales recruitment for them, for educators to get their master's or doctorate degree, to working as the regional manager of the Southeast for them and managing reps in 5 states, to then working for a company that is no longer in existence. I was laid off, and I saw the company like a month and a half into me being there. Everyone in marketing was laid off, which was a huge flag to me. And then I ended up being part of the layoff and hit sheer panic. It's nice to have a dual income, but sometimes you also need the dual income. And I have years and years and years of student loans. So fast forward through that, I ended up getting another job, and I was treated extremely poorly. I was screamed at and cussed out 1 minute, and then the next minute they would say, God put you in our life for a reason. We're so blessed to have you. And I found out I was the 8th person in 10 months in that position. And so I could tell you story after story, but bottom line is I ended up leaving there and jumping on my own. And so that was something I never planned on. I never planned on being a speaker. I actually have a very shy side to me that I've had to build confidence around. And so I would be petrified just to sit in a small group and like say my name and all of that. So it overcome that. And now, we are, like you said, it's been, here we are fast forwarding to 2021. And technically, Tom, you don't even know this, but today that we're recording this is the 13th anniversary of me being in business, like
Wow.
today. So it's a huge celebration and nothing I ever planned on. So here
Yeah.
we are, speaking, consulting, doing all things around the world, and books came along the way,
Yeah.
all through that.
Oh, it's such an interesting story. You made me think of so many different things. Your comment about second grade reminds me of what I often say to secondary teachers is, just go spend a day in a first grade or second grade or third grade classroom, because you are going to gain a new appreciation for being a secondary teacher because you'll be thankful. You won't know. I mean, it's such impressive work. And I think so often, um, in the system, uh, there's a kind of diminishing of the work because the students are younger. There can be this dismissiveness, and the work that happens at the elementary level, especially the youngest of grade levels, is incredibly monumental. The other thing you said, which I find very interesting when I speak to a lot of speakers, and I would include myself in this category, and in terms of the level of shyness, or the level of, people probably don't understand that, as a speaker, when you're speaking in front of an audience, you're in complete control. And when you're in a social situation, you often don't have control over that situation. So a lot of people can't understand how someone like yourself, who could speak in front of thousands of people, would be inherently shy or inherently reserved in a social situation. But it's actually quite common amongst many of us who do this work, who have these two sides to our personality. And I think part of it is that when we get on stage, we know what we're going to say. We're in control of the clicker. We have the microphone, and we've got our presentation, and we're ready to roll. But it's a kind of interesting dynamic that happens in between. Have you noticed that as well amongst many of the people who are in this world of speaking and authoring?
Yes, almost everybody I talk to says the
Mhm.
exact same thing. And so I think control is a part of it. For me, I know another part of it is the fact that when I step on the stage or I'm working with a group, it is no longer about me, it's about the message.
Right.
So in a social aspect, all eyes are on you because they're talking about you.
Mhm.
Whereas when, you're speaking, it's not about me. It's about the message I'm there to deliver, to make an
Mhm.
impact, support educators in every level that we can. And
Mhm.
because I can make that switch, it's also why when I'm being introduced to a group, whether it's speaking on the stage or working in a school or a district, wherever I am, I usually ask, please don't introduce me unless you absolutely have to. And if you have to, then literally I want you to say, and here's our keynote speaker, Lavonna Roth,
There's
like
Lavonna.
as
Yeah.
minimal, right? Because the moment I'm about to go out, you just flipped the lens to me, and this isn't about me. And I
Right.
always say to them, they're like, but people want to know. And I'm like, and that's the people who already want to know. They've already Googled.
Right.
So they already know what they
Yeah,
want to
that's
know.
true. True. It is I just find it very interesting when I speak to so many speakers and authors. And the other thing you said before we move on, the other thing you said is that people often think there's this grand scheme of, in 20 years, I'm going to be this world renowned speaker that ignites the shine all around the world. And that's never the case. It sort of unfolds kind of in an organic way. And then suddenly 13 years into your business, here you are. And it never seems to, when I talk to so many people, it never seems to unfold that way. Okay. Enough about them. Let's talk about Lavonna. Let's make it about you.
Put it back on me.
That's right. Put the focus back on you. Let's start with the big ideas of Ignite Your Shine. For listeners who may not be familiar with your work, let's start with the big ideas here. What does Ignite Your Shine mean, and why do you believe that it's an essential part of a school's culture, where not only students feel inspired to achieve at their highest level, but educators feel inspired as well? So, what are the big ideas of Ignite Your Shine?
So we look at it as in the overall umbrella is really culture, but then there's so many segues underneath that with what happens. And we specifically coined the term human focused culture.
Mhm.
So a lot of what we want to see happen in schools, whether it's with staff showing up, reducing attrition, making sure that they have what they need from a personal perspective so that it shows up professionally to what actually happens with the learning in a classroom. And so if you use the human focused culture, like everything we do comes from the fact that we are humans and we look at the brain research side of things, that's a key piece to all of this. So
Hmm.
underneath it, it's using brain research. It is understanding people and how we operate and taking them through the acronym of SHINE, which I'm sure we'll get to later.
Yeah.
It is all about that whole child, that whole person. And so we approach everything through that lens because what you're really doing is you're creating psychological safety. And
Hmm.
so as we look through the lens of psychological safety, then that puts the brain into a state of learning. It puts people into a space that they feel not only included, but all the way up to the highest level of psychological safety, which they feel that they can challenge things to really look at the status quo. Is this what's best for kids? This is what's best for teachers, best for leadership, best for families. And you can really dive and explore that.
So, what does SHINE stand for? That, of course, is an acronym. And so let's go through what that acronym means, and then I'll have a follow up question for you on that.
Okay, yeah. So no, so Shine is, do you mind if I back up and tell a little bit as to how it came to
Absolutely. Go
be?
ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Take your
Okay.
time.
All right. So I was someone who did not do well in elementary. And then I'm sorry, I did very well in elementary. Got to middle
Yeah.
school, grades started to decline. Got into high school, I had D's and F's on my report card. And I got into college, I was put on probation to be kicked out because of my grades.
Yeah.
And so I've, along the way, started feeling very stupid. I felt that I wasn't smart. And so the word was not originally shine, it was originally smart. And I
Mm,
was going after an education, how we define smart, because my viewpoint is that we are phenomenal at putting kids into the box, and that box in education, at least here in the US, is reading, writing, math, and science. And
mhm,
that's the core focus of what we look at, which that's why the whole child often gets lost in that mix. Social emotional learning, everything. But when we look at this, I had started out in brain research, and I had this passion in me for not only me, but my experiences my daughter went through in school, students that felt stupid. And I thought, I am totally going to go after this word smart. And
mhm.
somebody said to me, Lavonna, you will never change the definition of smart, not in education. Well, if anyone knows me, part of my personality went, watch me, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other part, the lack of confidence at times went, what if they're right? And so I
Right.
had to take a step back and really look at that. And I'm grateful to that person now,
Mhm.
because what really stepped into my head was the word shine. And so I thought it is really how we shine. And I wanted an acronym because I wanted the acronym to be a framework that people
Okay.
can work within. So if you think about ignite your shine, like ignite your personal shine, which also your professional shine, when we look at it, the S is all about self. So really what we're focusing on are what are your strengths, gifts, skills, and talents. So we're really focusing on the things that either you were born with or you've learned to develop at a
Mhm.
high level. We're moving away from the view of what you can't do, because then
Right.
that's what a lot of us beat ourselves up. We play this comparison game, and if you see me on video, you're seeing I'm doing these little mirrors, which is my hand up. It's like a little mirror cupped toward me because I
Yeah.
sign. So I think if we start doing all these comparisons from social media, from the person teaching next door, the administrator leading across the county, whatever it may be. And so we start playing it. Well, what we forget is that we call it a lion of greatness, like a
Mhm.
lion, Lion, like a lion of greatness. And that's standing in that. It's not just about strengths, though. So it's not about just your mindset and taking care of you and the strengths you're in. It's the H and shine also, which is heart. And for that, that's about passion. Like, what do you love to do? Right? I don't love to teach science. I've taught it, right? Figured out a strength of it because my strengths come from teaching and knowing strategies and ways to do that, but it's not my passion.
Right.
And so what we really look for is how do we find it so people rise in their happiness, they rise in wanting to be where they are, they rise to their best self and offer their best self then to those that they are taking care of, or in a classroom, a school district, whatever that may look like. And we want them to rise in that. So, but that comes from passion, right?
Mhm.
So finding the best way. Now, I have so far talked about from the point of an adult,
Right.
but I want to imagine from the view of a kid. If I can learn, totally doable, if I can learn how to teach the strengths of a child to find out what they've learned, but I also tap into the passions they have. So, our lessons, for example, explore both of these areas. So, how do I tap into the passion of the kids and bring that to the learning? And that's when you start to see the brain research of what I was doing before, my books were based on strategies, how to engage kids. They did, but I
Mhm.
couldn't figure out the piece that was missing. And it's now what we call SEL, social emotional
Mhm.
learning.
Right.
So we pull all of that into this. And so to me, it's you can't have high level of achievement if you have not put the brain into a state of learning, which means social emotional learning has to be addressed.
Right.
That is right there. That's a piece of what's happening. Then we get
Yeah.
to letter I. I is inspire. So we know life is going to throw curveballs, right? So you think grit, perseverance, resiliency. How do you inspire yourself? How do you inspire others? And
Mhm.
this is a piece that sometimes in a school, it can be exhausting trying to inspire others, but it's also a critical piece that is often missing. So, how do you inspire you? How do you inspire others? When we get to N is navigate. In other words, what are you going to do with everything I just talked about? So it's putting into action plan and putting into play to create the human focused culture by pulling everything we talked about into what you do. So that is really the key piece. And that's the piece where the work comes in, the story, the
Right.
journey. What do you want this to look like? And when we get to E for exceptional, it's because you're becoming the exceptional person you were meant to be, not
Mhm.
anybody else. Stop trying to be others. Be you. Be exceptional
Right.
with who you are. So, exceptional leader, exceptional teacher, exceptional spouse, exceptional family member, friend, whatever it is, it's you settling into who you are so that you ignite your shine.
Right. So, am I right to look at SHINE as both an acronym, but also as a kind of continuum that as I go through the process of developing self, my passion, inspiring, I start to navigate and become, is that fair to look at it that way as well?
Absolutely. And I love that you picked up on that, Tom, because when I first was creating this, I saw exceptional as the result.
Okay.
And then it hit me, we never arrive, right? We're always learning, we're always figuring ourselves out, we're
Mhm.
always changing things because we're human and we love novelty. As much as we
Right.
love structure, we also love non-structure.
Right.
And I don't
Right.
even know if that's a word, I'm throwing that out there. So, and when we look at this, it's important to understand that it's a process. It's exactly, you are spot on.
Okay. Okay. Because it seems to me that at any given moment I can present exceptional doesn't mean arrival. It means this is the best of who I am in this moment. And that can always be malleable. That can always continue to grow. I can always become a more advanced, a better version of myself. But at the same time, it is who I am, and learning to accept that and thrive in that space, even if I circle back and start to find more passion and to expand myself. I love that. So I want to pick up on something you said. You talked about brain based and brain research, because I think when people first, if they're not familiar with your work, it would be very easy for people to look at, oh, ignite your shine sounds pretty fluffy. And you, I know, spend a lot of time making sure people understand that there is a neuroscience background to the development of the acronym. That this isn't fluff. So can you make that connection for us? What maybe a deeper connection between the science of the brain and the shine acronym, if you will?
Yes. And so I think, thankfully, I think we've made headway on this. I think in the past,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, it's that woo woo stuff. It's that fluff stuff, and oh, here we go, getting all touchy
Yeah.
feely.
Yeah.
Well, we're human. So yes,
That's
and I
right.
think, we're finally, that's where social emotional learning, SEL, has gotten its name, and we're making the grounds on this. And so like when you look back at the brain, I hinted at some of this already,
Mhm.
but is the brain in a state of learning? And so you can sit here and say that, oh my goodness, suck it up, buttercup, like let's go, you
Mhm.
just need to toughen up, you just need to grow thick skin.
Mhm.
That's nice to say, but that's not internally what's happening with the person. They can put on the front, which means they now put up a wall, and you now reduce psychological safety at that point. And
Right.
so we all come with our own stories, right? We all come with our own experiences, and all of that affects how we look at things. And
Mhm.
so just because I, for example, may have grown up in a situation that was tough and I learned how to go through that, it doesn't mean it's the best way to go through it. It doesn't mean it's the right way to go through it. And just because I figured out a skill set doesn't mean the other person has. Right. So when we think about looking at it from the brain perspective, it's very complex. It really is. But
Yeah.
we can simplify that when you look at Shine, that again, the core components in there are really about, the best way you could actually probably say this is confidence.
Yeah.
Right. You can replace the word shine for confidence. That's what it's
Yeah.
about. And confidence does this. Like it is up and down, it's all over the place. And you're never always confident in every situation. And it's something else to keep in mind. And that's just how the brain operates. We say we're in our comfort zone, and we step out of the comfort zone. And if we're successful, it gets bigger. And if we're not, we step back in. And then hopefully we've created an opportunity that the brain is willing to take risks because we've created the culture that allows that. So you take another risk. Now we innovate. We're more agile in things that happen, like a pandemic.
Right.
There's a lot that comes into it. We build that resiliency, and we keep broadening this out. And so all of that, will stem from the brain understanding that it's okay to do this, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up. And we always say, like, you're going to mess up, right? You're human. So it's not about the actual mistake, right? It's about what you do with the mistake that matters. Right. So I'll say it again. It's about what you do with the mistake that matters.
Right. Absolutely. I love that you use the word confidence, because I'm making so many connections to the work that I do in assessment and grading, where my colleagues and I talk about how assessment is not just this clinical exercise in number crunching or gathering evidence, that there is a human being on the other end of the assessment experience, and that assessment should always support and build hope and efficacy, right? Hope being about expectation, my expectations of success, and efficacy being the belief that I can get there, and making sure that nothing we do in our work around assessment, which can be as pressure packed for students as anything they experience in school. I mean, maybe the social environment is pressure packed, but assessment is up there. And I just love the focus on confidence, because there's so much overlap to the idea of making sure that whatever assessment strategies you utilize, let's make sure that it maintains and builds student confidence about their eventual success. And that creates that psychological safety space for them to continue to take risks and push their learning. So I just, as you were talking there, I was making so many connections to the sort of sphere of my work in the area of assessment and grading, where it's a hard conversation to have sometimes when you talk assessment, because it can feel very clinical, and yet we can never lose sight of the fact that that student is on the other end of that. I want to talk first about teachers, because one of the interesting things I found is that I think the default when I first heard about you and your work and Ignite Your Shine, I immediately went to the place of students. But you put an interesting twist on it for me, which is that this can also be a framework for teachers. So we know that teaching is such a selfless profession, that teachers are often in positions where they just give of themselves, and so it can be challenging for teachers to kind of focus on themselves, like themselves and their heart and their passions and that and so forth. So during COVID, of course, staff morale has been just taking a beating. And we've become very aware of where teachers are in terms of their collective morale, and even individually their morale as well. So you say that the Ignite Your Shine framework can have a positive impact on staff morale. So tell us how that happens. Tell us how we can use the framework to help maintain and then grow the morale of teachers and educators.
Yeah, so I'm grateful that you made that connection from students to teachers, and it's leaders includes, like, we love to work with the whole staff, because it's really a philosophy that you're beginning to understand, a framework, and now you can move the whole school through that, or district. And it's parents, it's families, it's bottom line, it's any human being. And we work with corporations on Ignite Your Shine. So we work with teams, CEO suites and C suites and all that. So it's really for a human, because that's what the bottom line is that it comes down to. And again, I appreciate you bringing up the confidence thing, because that's the biggest thing that we talk about, is that when you're confident, you can get through so many of these things. So when we look at teachers, we look at morale. A lot has been impacted. If you think about it from the brain perspective, the brain for majority of humans at this point has been in a very heightened cortisol stressful state, which means it's in a state of survival, not in a state of thriving. And so our brain cares about one thing, and that is surviving. So it wants to survive to thrive. And if it's in survival mode, you can't think at the level you want to think. So that frontal lobe's at the very front of the brain here, right behind the forehead, all of that goes into a state of like fear. And the amygdala, which is in the limbic system and deep in the brain, the amygdala is always on alert. And they're teeny tiny, they're almond size, almond shape. And there's two of them in the brain, and they're always watching for our survival. So when we think about teachers who are now adapting to an entire environment that is many cases has been virtual, they have all the tools to learn, no pandemic manual was handed to them or their leaders, like to no one. And now bottom line is everybody's in a state of survival, because it's not only that, they're fearing for their own life. They don't know what this will do to them personally or their loved ones. And so we create this whole heightened, which when we now ask an educator to show up every day and be smiling and cheerful and, knock it out of the ballpark in teaching, the crazy part is most teachers do it.
Yeah.
Right? They will rise to the challenge. They're incredible. Educators are just, they blow my mind at how they make things happen. But it doesn't mean that over a period of time like we're having right now, that doesn't create major issues going forward. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been doing running faculty meetings for schools. And we come in from that perspective of morale and survival. And we do an activity that essentially reminds them that they've had challenges before, and
Mhm.
all we're doing is reminding the brain, but through this activity, reminding the brain that, wait a minute, we have been here before. We survived. We did okay. Not a pandemic. It's a different situation, but you've been here before as far as the challenges, the emotions. And so once we make that connection, we see a lot of relief. They share in the chat because we've been doing it virtually, share in the chat the how they feel. And you just see the shift in energy happen. And that's what's important for staff or for administrators to remember, that they themselves do their shine, but the morale within the school, you can only sustain that level for so long before we have to give people a dip and allow them to then literally shine, right? To
Right.
bring them back up and build up that confidence, to get back to some normalcy, reduce the brain and how it's feeling. So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's
Yeah.
definitely possible.
I'm very curious about this idea of you coming in and running a faculty meeting, because obviously that's a very short period of time. So can you give us a sense of what that might look like? If listeners out there are interested in, hey, that's a great idea, I would love to have Lavonna or someone from her team come and facilitate a faculty meeting for us so we can start to have this. Well, walk us through what that would look like. What's the structure of it? What are the activities? How do you in a very short period of time begin to engineer that conversation?
Yes, so we have, a lot of administrators that we're already connected with. So we have shared with them, how to do this, but you can always reach out to us. We would love to make it happen. It's 45 minutes in length because we
Okay.
know that, faculty meetings. And to me, if you can put in an email, put an email, and allow a moment to have a faculty meeting of connection and bonding. One of the things that we've lost during the pandemic, or feel that we have lost, is that connection. But we do this virtually, and what we're doing is we create extremely interactive, and the way we design the activities to is actually creates a high level connection. As a matter of fact, Tom, I'd be willing to challenge that the connection we create over Zoom, is that's the platform we prefer to use in this
Mhm.
case. So when it comes to Zoom, that we can create a higher level connection than if we are in person. And so the design is around just, again, the challenge with this. We give a moment in breakout rooms, that is where the depth of the connection actually happens. Come back out. We debrief some of the things and realizations of ahas that have occurred from that, which creates more connection, but now as the large faculty. And then we go through the letters of shine and we talk about the different components and what that looks like for you personally, what it
Right.
looks like for you professionally in your role. And then we
Mhm.
bring it to a close with a fun little activity that I do that most people have never seen before, that involves a science experiment of all things.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. So that's a bit
Can't
of
give
a
it all
teaser.
away.
Can't
We got
give
to
it
have
out.
some
No.
surprises.
Absolutely.
Surprises.
So I'm really that really is an interesting twist or take on the work, in that you're coming in at a time where the issue of morale is clearly on everybody's minds, and morale is tough to maintain regardless of there being a pandemic. But you add in the stresses that teachers have had over the last calendar 12 months or more with the pandemic. It's just I don't think people can, a lot of people outside of education don't truly appreciate how relentlessly taxing this has been on educators, and trying to, and yet, as you say, doing incredible work with students through different platforms and different opportunities. We all had a bit of a shock and awe last spring, but boy, oh boy, the work I'm seeing teachers doing, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing, is incredibly inspiring, despite all of the obstacles and challenges that they face with the pandemic. You talked a
That
little bit about, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that for sure, 100%.
Yeah,
But also, what we've been doing a lot of work with administrators lately,
yeah,
because
yeah,
we know it's the trickle down effect, and
yeah,
so the teachers have been taking care of the students, administrators are taking care of the teachers, but who's taking care of the administrators?
right.
And so I think it's important for them to, and this is what I love about that faculty meeting too, is that I tell them, like, our team is here to take care of you. You literally show up for the faculty meeting. You have to do nothing else. Let us run
Right.
it. Let you connect and bond with your own staff.
Right. That's a great point. Now, beyond the hiring you for the faculty meeting, I want to just go on a bit of a tangent here for leaders. So principals, even assistant principals, or even we can think about superintendents, et cetera. But let's talk about the school principal. What else can they do with a level of intentionality that really starts to direct attention toward teachers and their own shine? How do we as a school leader, what can we do to be purposeful about that work?
So one of it is going to be knowing your staff.
Okay.
We hear that, just
Yeah.
like we say to teachers, you should know your students, know
Mm-hmm.
their names, know how it's said. But we go deeper than that. It's, do you actually know the strengths of your teachers? And do you remind them of that when they need it?
Mm-hmm.
Do you look at it when you're switching, like whether it's content areas or switching grade levels? Are you looking at the letters of shine? Does it actually make sense? Because the moment you put a teacher into a situation that is not a passion of theirs, they will make it happen for a while. Like that's again what teachers do. But
Yeah.
what you're happening is if I put my hand up high, and again I know some are listening to this, so I put my hand up high and I think we start to go down a slope. That's what's happening to that teacher. It's the same thing when we have a teacher who says yes to everything. They are a stellar teacher. They're the the star in the school. We have several of them. What we end up doing, we burn them out because we give them so much. So instead, if you look at the strengths across your staff, for example, look at their passions, now that's different. The way you do content that they're in, what grade level they're in, the committees they're serving on, the projects that they're part of, committees, like all of that now begins to take a different view as to how that's done. And so when we do that, people start to live in that excitement and they have that energy. And right there is a shift with culture.
Yeah.
And then we get, if you think that I mainly touched on S and H, but again, it's that that inspiration. So how are you creating this? And one of the number one things I would encourage leaders to do is ask your staff. Just ask them.
Mm-hmm.
So many times we think we have to, administrate. I see it in Facebook groups that I'm in, like I spent $3,000 trying to, give out Starbucks gift cards and trying to do this and that. When has anyone ever taken the moment just ask them, like, what is it that they want? Because maybe they could care less about that. And maybe what they want is actually something you could do for free or takes a second of your time. And, but we a lot of times don't have these discussions to really get to know our staff to make these decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're talking there, I'm thinking about school leaders, really investing in understanding the strengths and the passions of their teachers. And it seems to me that almost creates a kind of inertia where if we continue to highlight for others what their strengths are and help them find their passions, they themselves become inspired, which allows them to navigate and therefore manifest the exceptional side of themselves. I'm sort of seeing that almost, if you were to take the acronym, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeing principals investing disproportionately in the S and the H, and therefore being able to sort of produce this kind of momentum for people. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yes, because you're showing that you care.
Yeah.
You're uplifting your people. You're putting them in the sweet spot. We call it the shine spot, but the sweet spot of where they best live. And it's important for educators to also understand that it's not just about in the school building. It's also what they're doing personally. Are they embedding those moments in?
Yeah, you feel free to make up as many words as you want, listeners. As you navigate the Ignite Your Shine website, you'll notice that there's a lot of different words. Instead of workshops, they're called fun shops. And I love that. So you feel free to make up as many words as you want. Let's pivot now to students. And I believe you subscribe, as I do, that social emotional learning is most impactful and long-lasting when it's taught within the context of the intended learning outcomes or the standards and not treated as this separate silo. So how do teachers use the Ignite Your Shine framework to teach and promote social emotional competencies within the intended standards? So let's triangulate that. You've got the Ignite Your Shine framework, we've got social emotional competencies, and we've got the standards in the intended learning. Help us bring those three things together to talk about what teachers would do to bring that about in their classrooms.
I love this question, Tom, because you're speaking right to my heart, which you've shared as your heart too.
Yeah.
That so many times what's happening right now is, oh my goodness, I have all this SEL to teach. I already had this much to teach in this teeny tiny amount of time, and now I've got to add SEL in. Nope, It's why we created a fun shop. I'm glad you pointed that out. A fun note and a fun shop. Because we believe in having fun interaction. I mean, you can't talk about the brain and then not model it, right? So. Right. It's all blended together, but we created a fun shop called Content and SEL Unite.
Mm.
because we shouldn't be seeing them as separate things. What really is happening is that we blend it. And it's so easy if you think about like a historical character, or, a
Mhm.
historical figure, I should say, and you're talking about what they did, whether it was right or wrong in history. You're talking about what they did. That is an incredible opportunity to pull in SEL right
Right.
then. Why did they make that decision? What else could they have done? Who did it impact positively or negatively? Like some of the questions we've already done, but we've never looked at it through the lens of SEL. But then even adding in other things, especially self-awareness, having students think and reflect about it for themselves. I think
Mhm.
about a character in a book. What do you think they should do next? Now, we haven't read what they did, but what do we think they should do next? What would be
Mhm.
some decisions? And based upon the decisions that you listed, would they be ones like, are these good ones, great ones, not ones we should do? Still a choice to do, but no, not a good one. You're
Right.
getting kids to reflect on themselves, how they would handle it. You're getting them to reflect on, okay, that is a choice, but is it a good choice?
Right. Yeah, I find so often that we and maybe it's a natural tendency for teachers to silo things, but I think there's just so many opportunities to infuse and naturally, blend uh, competencies inside of a context. Because as you mentioned, you look at history, or if you look at writing, and or you look at even scientific decisions, or pivots that happen in science where we gain new knowledge. There's always a human side to that. There's always a humanity that makes the decision, or there's a human side that has to endure the residual effects of different decisions. And I think bringing that brings learning to life. It makes the human side of learning more tangible and more real, as opposed to it being just something clinical that I read about in a book. So I really subscribe to that notion as well, and I certainly appreciate that. Okay, so as we sort of finish up here with the framework, I'm hoping you can walk us through each aspect, and let's maybe get a little bit more granular with the framework as far as teachers and what are some things they can do. So we know that, for example, the focus on self is to focus on strength. So I guess what I'm getting at is asking you to give us some specific sort of strategies or approaches that would allow us to address each one of the letters, if you will, in the acronym: the self, the heart, inspire, navigate, exceptional. So in terms of what teachers can do positively and to permanently impact all of their shines, if you will, what does that look like in a classroom? What are some specific things teachers would be doing to address each of those areas?
Well, I would definitely encourage anyone who's listening to go to igniteyoursshine.com and click
Mhm.
on our learning library, because we have free lessons in there. And they
Fantastic.
are lessons that can be, it's two, well, one's an overview of what Shine is, and they're videos of me that you show to students. And so I'm
Mhm.
talking to the students, sharing with them information, and then there's hands-on lessons that go with them. And it's
Mhm.
two per letter that we have, plus an like culminating one at the end. And we also have ones in there that are meant for virtually for teachers, and we have
Mhm.
some for parents slash caretakers to be able to implement too. And so one of the things that when we think about strengths that we encourage you to do is to have those conversations around strengths. So it can be a personal reflection too. It can be, well, I see my 5 classmates here, and I know so and so, they are phenomenal at this. I know their strength, and they have a chance to start sharing the great things about each other, which is going to bring the class together. And they're going to realize, wait a minute, I didn't know you saw that about me.
Mhm.
Wow, you do know that. So we start building this collaboration. So again, it goes back to some of those discussions you're going to have, but it's getting kids to realize this too, not just the teacher sharing it, but students having an opportunity. So we have in there, for example, one of the lessons is an all about me quiz. And so they answer questions, and then they end up being put into one of 4 light sources. So it sounds like a label, and I'm very persistent, I guess would be the best word, that this isn't about labeling kids. What it's about is creating a creating segments that then allow discussions. So for example, if the 4 light sources are, it's a traffic light, it's a lighthouse, fire, or I'm going blank on, oh, sun, like the sun up in the sky.
Right.
And so when they take this, they find out, and we have just arbitrarily sat down. This was not like some third party research thing, but we sat down and they said, okay, if you're a son, when we think about a son, we think of compassionate, warm, friendly, caring of others. And so what ends up happening is that they end up being one of the 4 light sources, when all reality, they're actually all of them, right? But what ends up happening is they find some similarities, and they sit with groups. And we've done this a variety of ways. When I work in schools, the way I have the teachers do it to go through this is they go to the corner of the room that has to do with their light source, and they have to create a statue that represents the meaning of who they are.
Mm.
But what we're really doing is we're noticing similarities between students, which is really cool when students do this, because they may have someone in the group that they didn't like, and now you've created a whole similarity for them to discuss and a connection. But then we also facilitate discussions amongst all four light sources of how really we are all of them. And hey, just because I'm not great at this, what's awesome is you are. So would you be able to support me and help me when I need it? And I'd be happy to do the same for you with my strengths. So that's an example of one.
Yeah. That's, you know, it's interesting because you're so spot on with the idea of labels, and labels can certainly be limiting and restricting and not trying to label. But at the same time, there is something to naming and noticing myself and knowing kind of where my strengths lie. And that's not to restrict me, but it's more to understand me and understand, you know, what I would be, what I'm about and who I am as an individual. And that level of awareness or metacognition, not just who I am as a person, but who I am as a learner, is such a valuable skill for all of us, never mind a student. It's a skill for adults to have as well, because I'm sure, you know, as I do, there are many adults who don't have a level of awareness that might be good for them to develop a little bit in our society. That's for sure. Lavonna, I really, really have enjoyed our, you know, talking about, I just, you can't come away from this conversation without feeling good. You have a way of energizing the conversation. And certainly I appreciate and tremendously respect the work that you're doing. And I think you know, obviously at some point, I'm gonna find an excuse to have you back and continue to dig deep into the work, and have listeners, you know, share maybe at a deeper level just some of the things that you're finding and uncovering in your own research and your own work and your own sort of experiences with schools. But we're going to finish up with a segment that I call 3 questions, where we're going to take even though this has been very light and not light as in not serious, but it's an uplifting conversation. We're going to have a little fun now, which is I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I have a bonus question after. So there's actually going to be 4. I've got 3 questions that'll be kind of these fun, lighthearted questions. I do this with every interviewee during the interviews, and it's just a chance for listeners to get to know Lavonna a little bit on a personal level. Nothing too intrusive, but certainly fun to kind of get your perspective on these arbitrary, random, meaningless questions that I'm about to ask you. So here's the first one. The first one is a choice. Would you rather be able to breathe underwater or fly through the air?
Fly through the air.
Okay.
Hands down.
Hands down. How come?
Because I love to travel, and I love flying in a plane because I can see the world from a different perspective and see so much more.
Yeah.
And so as much as I love dolphins, it'd be cool to breathe underwater and swim with them. But no,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just to be able to feel that freedom of flying.
Yeah, I think I would probably choose the same. Second one, would you rather be fluent in all languages or be a master of every musical instrument?
Fluent in all languages.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a challenge. I play the piano, flute, and piccolo. So it's funny when you say musical instruments.
Wow. Okay. Didn't know that.
But yeah, I don't actually really talk about that much. So because I don't have a piano anymore or a flute or a piccolo, but I can still play. Like I know my sister has a flute, so
yeah,
I have a chance to play hers every now and then. But no, fluent in all languages. I actually, when I was about to be kicked out of college for my grades, I was in a desperate situation, and I pulled the university catalog because I always wanted to learn sign language. When I worked at McDonald's, and which was my first job, I encountered a man who would come in and point to the pictures because he was deaf and we couldn't communicate. And then in college, I had a job, and that deaf couple came in, couldn't communicate. So I wanted to learn sign language. So I looked it up, but in order to take sign language, you had to go into deaf education. So that's when I became a teacher for the deaf. And I learned to sign. And I hate barriers. I hate barriers, being able to communicate and connect with humans.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's very impressive. All of it, learning to sign, playing the instruments. Are you someone who, coming back after a long day of workshopping and dinner, you walk into the hotel lounge and you sort of saunter up to the piano and start to play? Are you one that just impromptu plays, or do you feel like you're a little bit out of practice?
out of practice, and I've never, even though I did competitions, recitals, I hate playing in front of people. We had a piano at one
Okay.
point, and my husband was just like, "How come you won't play in front of me?" And I'm like, "Because it's a de-stressor for me, and when I have people listening, it stresses me out. It's no longer
Right,
me
right,
getting relaxed."
right. So you have all this talent that you don't want to share with people,
I
but I
hide it.
understand that. That's right. Well, maybe one day we'll get you to play piano. I don't know how. Maybe you can record yourself and we'll put it on the podcast. I don't know. We'll figure that out down the road. All
All
right,
right. Well,
last one, or not last one. I've got two more for you, but the last would you rather question is: would you rather be known as a one-hit wonder as a novelist, like you wrote a novel, you're a one-hit wonder, or would you rather be a one-hit wonder with a song?
a song.
A song. Okay.
Yes. Songs tap into our memory, emotions. We connect with them. They can change the state that we're in with the brain. It can change our mood.
Mhm.
So for me, I'd rather have the song to have an opportunity to impact others.
Yeah. And I think the other part of songs is that people tend to listen to songs thousands of times.
That's true.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I talked about happiness booster, and the happiness booster for me is music. It's an instant mood changer for me. So whenever I'm feeling my thoughts are going down a negative path, or I'm feeling a little defeatist with work or whatever, uh, music instantly it's an instant mood maker. And I think that people read a book maybe once, maybe twice, then it sits on a shelf. Whereas your one hit wonder is going to be, I still listen to songs from when I was a child that I remember. And the example I gave on the podcast a couple of weeks ago was Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. I got that album for my 10th birthday, and I still love that album and I still listen to it. And
That's awesome.
that's 43 years ago. So I mean, that music is so enduring, like it's long lasting. So here's the bonus
Yeah.
question. Listeners, you probably don't know this. Some of you will, most of you probably don't. Lavonna is a diehard hockey fan, and that of course warms every Canadian's heart. Lavonna is a diehard Tampa Bay Lightning fan. I believe you're a season ticket holder, if I'm not mistaken. I see you at the games on Instagram all the time. You're not a season ticket holder? No. Okay. But you do go to the games quite frequently. So where did that come from? How did you become such a big hockey fan?
So I wasn't, but when you live with a husband who is,
Okay. The influence
it's
of the
by
spouse.
yes, it's by default. So my husband is a huge hockey fan, huge
Okay.
hockey fan. And then my bonus son, which is his, biological son, but my bonus
Yeah.
son
Yeah.
played ice hockey. And so when I came into the picture, he was already playing travel hockey. And so
Ah.
I learned like hockey with that. And then you get into the city. In our city, I live in Tampa. And so it's all about the Lightning, And so you see people, it doesn't matter whether we are in season, off season, it doesn't matter. Everyone's wearing it. And then I started going to the games, which says a lot for me, Tom, because I just want you to know I hate to be cold. It's why I moved to Florida. But you can bundle up and go feel the energy and watch the players and just
Yeah.
how stellar they are. Because the reason I didn't like hockey, and I hate to say it, I didn't like it before, was because I didn't like the fights. Right?
Right.
Like I don't like people hurting other people. I now understand it's the culture of the game and I understand why they do it to rev up energy. And so now I have an appreciation, not still for the fights, but I have an appreciation for it and just learning more. Like it's fun. And the games, there's nothing like a hockey game. Like
Yeah.
the action is constant.
Mhm.
So you can't get bored.
It's one of those interesting things when people ask me about hockey, of course, because being Canadian, it's a requirement by law, as I said to you earlier.
It's in the blood.
It's in the blood. It's one of those sports where I tell people, until you go to a game live, you're going to have a hard time. Like if you're new to the sport, don't watch it on TV until you've been to a live game, because once you've watched it live, you'll be able to understand more what you're seeing on TV. It's in some sports, if it's not part of your culture, whereas, for other sports, like you grow up watching football or you grow up watching baseball or you grow up, watching basketball, you kind of have an instinct about it. But if hockey is not on your radar, really try to get to a game live, and then you'll kind of understand the ebb and flow, because it's hard to follow the puck for sure. But I just love the Instagram posts where you're at the Lightning games. And certainly all of us hockey fans are envious of the Stanley Cup championship and the run that the Lightning have been on. And we talked before we hit record that Tampa is on a roll now with the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup. almost had the World Series, and certainly some would argue a ill-timed pitching change during the World Series probably cost the World Series. But this could be quite the run for Tampa if that was all going on. So really, just impressed. So now I know more about the hockey fandom and where that's come from. So I'm happy you've joined the club. One final question for you. Yeah, one final question for you, Lavonna. It's a question I ask all interviewees as we close out the interview, and it's a theme of success and happiness as I run through the podcast and ask everybody the same question. And the question is, if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success, how would you respond to them?
I think success is different for everyone, but a phrase that I might use would be contentment with a nudge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of times we can be afraid to go after success. It's that fear that settles in, that lack of confidence in that moment. But if you can take a risk and then feel the contentment from that, the happiness, that's another word would definitely pop in my head, that
Mm-hmm.
contentment though from it, but to nudge yourself to go again, because what really happens is that we're not content as humans with staying in the same place. We want to grow. That's a need, a desire that we have. And so if you're content, now have that nudge, right? You're feeling success. You're content again, feel that nudge, but don't just feel it, do something with it.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Listeners, you'll remember, Muhammad Khalifa, who I had on last week, also talked about the difference between contentment and complacency, right? The idea that you don't want to be complacent, but you want to be content with who you are. I absolutely love that framing of success around contentment with a nudge. You just have a way of crafting that little extra. I love that, the idea of being content, but you want to keep growing and you want to keep pushing yourself in all the right ways and all the positive ways. So I really do appreciate that. Listeners, you can follow and really should follow Lavonna on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is at Lavonna Roth, just as it sounds and is spelled. You also should follow Ignite Your Shine Now. So at Ignite Your Shine Now on Instagram is the Instagram account to follow there as well. Lavonna is also on LinkedIn, Lavonna Roth on LinkedIn. You can tap in there, and also the Ignite Your Shine website. So it's igniteyourshine.com. And it's a fabulous website, Lavonna. I just want to say that it's really, really user-friendly, really great graphics. The optics of it are fantastic, and there's a tremendous amount of great information on the website. So listeners would really encourage you to head there as well. So Lavonna, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Thanks so much, and I look forward to next time.
Thank you, Tom. And I also want to say thank you to you because you're making an impact with all you're doing with this podcast that you're reaching. So you're very much appreciated and valued.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You bet.